Some friendships are built on basketball courts, forged in childhood dreams, and sealed with unbreakable promises. At least, that's what Michael Jordan thought, until the evening he saw his old friend digging through trash behind Joey's Pizza. David Thompson had once been the better player between them, the one who taught Michael his signature moves, the friend who believed in him before anyone else did. Now he was homeless, broken, and carrying a secret that would shake Michael's world to its core. What starts as a simple act of kindness, helping an old friend, quickly spirals into a journey that will force Michael to question everything he knows about loyalty, redemption, and the true meaning of justice. Because David isn't just running from poverty or bad luck, he's running from a truth so devastating that it threatens to destroy not only their friendship, but also Michael's cherished memories of his own family. Sometimes the hardest choices come down to this. What matters more? The justice we seek, or the mercy we show? And can a single act of forgiveness change not just one life, but countless others? Michael Jordan's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he turned down Cedar Street. The familiar sights of his old neighborhood in Wilmington, North Carolina, brought a smile to his face. Even after all these years of fame and fortune, this place still felt like home. He drove slowly past the corner store where he used to buy penny candy, now replaced by a shiny new convenience mart. The basketball court, where he'd spent countless hours practicing, lay ahead, its rusty hoops a testament to time gone by. Kids still played there, their shouts and laughter carrying through his open car window. "Just like old times," Michael muttered, easing his luxury car down the narrow street. He was supposed to be heading to a business meeting, but something had pulled him here today. Maybe it was nostalgia, or maybe it was something else. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Michael was about to turn, around when movement behind Joey's Pizza caught his eye. Someone in tattered clothes was digging through the dumpster, shoulders hunched against the evening chill. Michael's first instinct was to look away. He'd seen homeless people before and always tried to help when he could. But something about this person's movement seemed familiar. The way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, like a basketball player ready to drive to the hoop. "No way," Michael whispered, pulling his car to the curb. He squinted through the growing darkness. The man's face was hidden by a dirty baseball cap, but there was something about him. Michael's heart started pounding. He knew that stance, that way of moving. He'd seen it thousands of times on the playground, back when they were kids dreaming of NBA glory. "David?" The name escaped his lips before he could stop it. "David Thompson?" The man's head snapped up. Even in the dim light, Michael could see his eyes widen with recognition. For a split second, their gazes locked, and Michael felt like he was 12 years old again, passing the ball to his best friend on the playground. Then David ran. "Wait!" Michael jumped out of his car, not bothering to close the door. His expensive shoes slapped against the pavement as he chased after his childhood friend. "David, stop!" But David kept running, ducking into the narrow alley behind the restaurant. His movements were jerky and uncoordinated, nothing like the smooth athleticism Michael remembered. Trash cans clattered as David knocked them over, trying to block Michael's path. "Please," Michael called out, "I just want to talk." David emerged onto Market Street, his breathing heavy and ragged. He stumbled once, caught himself against a lamppost, and kept going. But Michael could see he was running out of steam. Memories flashed through Michael's mind as he ran. David teaching him how to fake left and drive right. The two of them sharing a chocolate milkshake at Wilson's Diner. David cheering louder than anyone else when Michael made his first basket in a real game. "You were my best friend," Michael shouted, his voice echoing off the brick buildings. "Please, Just stop! David tried to sprint across the street, but his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the sidewalk, his thin body shaking with exhaustion. Michael caught up and knelt beside him, careful not to touch him or crowd him. Up close, the changes in his friend were shocking. David's face was weathered and lined, his skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His clothes were layers of torn fabric, and a sour smell hung around him. But his eyes, those were the same eyes that had sparkled with mischief during their childhood adventures. "Let me help you," Michael said softly, as if talking to a frightened animal. "Please." David pushed himself to a sitting position, his back against a wall. His hands trembled as he pulled his knees to his chest. When he spoke, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be here, Michael. You shouldn't see me like this." "What happened to you?" Michael asked, his throat tight with emotion. "We were going to take over the NBA together. Remember? That was our dream." A bitter laugh escaped David's cracked lips. "Dreams don't always come true. At least yours did." He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. "At least let me buy you dinner," Michael said. "For old time's sake. Wilson's Diner is still open. Remember how we used to split those chocolate shakes?" David's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. But exhaustion had drained the fight from him. After a long moment, he gave a tiny nod. "One meal," he mumbled. "Then you leave me alone. Promise." Michael stood and offered his hand. David stared at it for several seconds before reaching up with trembling fingers. As Michael helped him to his feet, the streetlight caught David's face, highlighting a long scar running down his right cheek. A scar that hadn't been there when they were kids. "What happened to you, Dee?" Michael whispered, more to himself than to his friend. David pulled his hand away and wrapped his arms around himself. "You don't want to know, MJ. Trust me on that." As they walked toward the diner, Michael noticed how David kept his distance, how his eyes constantly scanned the street, how he flinched at every passing car. The carefree boy who had taught Michael his first basketball moves was gone, replaced by this broken shell of a man. But why? What could have happened to turn his talented, confident friend into someone who dug through dumpsters and ran from kindness? The neon sign of Wilson's Diner buzzed ahead of them, casting a warm glow on the sidewalk. Michael held the door open, and David hesitated before stepping inside. The bell above the door chimed, just like it had when they were kids. Some of the other customers stared and whispered, recognizing Michael Jordan, but all Michael could focus on was the way David's shoulders hunched, trying to make himself invisible. As they slid into a booth, the same one they'd always claimed as their spot, Michael made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't leave this time. He wouldn't let his friend disappear again. Whatever had happened to David, whatever dark path had led him here, Michael would help him find his way back. But first, he had to get David to trust him enough to tell his story. The waitress approached, with menus, and David's hands shook as he reached for one. Michael watched his childhood friend hide behind the laminated pages, and his heart ached at the mystery of what had gone so terribly wrong. The fluorescent lights of Wilson's Diner cast harsh shadows across David's face. Michael noticed how his friend's eyes kept darting toward the exit, like a trapped animal looking for escape. The vinyl booth squeaked as David shifted uncomfortably. "Order whatever you want," Michael said softly, trying to keep his voice casual. "Their burgers are still the best in town." David lowered the menu slightly, revealing bloodshot eyes. "I shouldn't be here, Michael. People are staring." "Let them stare," Michael replied, though he understood David's discomfort. Every few seconds, someone in the diner would sneak a photo with their phone or whisper to their companion. But their attention was on Michael Jordan, the basketball legend. They barely noticed the homeless man sitting across from him. The waitress returned, her pencil poised over her notepad. Her name tag read Betty, and she had the same kind smile Michael remembered from 30 years ago. "The usual, Mr. Jordan?" she asked. "Double cheeseburger, extra fries?" Michael nodded, then looked at David expectantly. His friend's voice was barely audible as he ordered a bowl of soup and water. "Add a chocolate shake," Michael said. "2 straws, like old times." The memory hit them both at once. Suddenly, Michael wasn't seeing the worn-down man across from him, but rather a 12-year-old boy with bright eyes and a quick smile. They'd sit in this very booth after basketball practice, sharing a shake and planning their future. "Remember that move you taught me?" Michael asked, trying to draw David out. "The fake pass that always fooled Coach Williams?" A ghost of a smile crossed David's face. "The Thompson Special. You were the only one who could pull it off right." "That's because I had the best teacher." Michael leaned forward. "You were better than me back then, D. Everyone knew it." David's smile vanished. "Ancient history," he muttered, fidgeting with his paper napkin. "Look where we both ended up. What happened after you moved away? One day you were there, the next. Life happened." David's voice hardened. "Not everyone gets their dreams, MJ. Some of us just fall." The waitress returned with their drinks, placing the chocolate shake between them. 2 red and white striped straws stuck out of the whipped cream, just like when they were kids. David stared at it for a long moment before speaking again. "Remember the pact we made? Right here in this booth?" Michael nodded. How could he forget? They'd been 12 years old, flush with victory after winning their first Junior League championship together. "We were going to be the greatest basketball duo in NBA history," Michael said. "Jordan and Thompson, unstoppable together." David's laugh was hollow. "I still have the paper we wrote it on, you know. Kept it all these years." He reached into his tattered coat and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From inside, he extracted a yellowed piece of notebook paper, carefully folded. Michael's throat tightened as David smoothed out the paper on the table. Their childish handwriting was still visible. "We, Michael Jordan and David Thompson, hereby swear to become NBA superstars together, best friends forever. Nothing can stop us." They'd signed it in blue ballpoint pen and had Betty witness it. The paper was fragile now, held together by careful folds and hope. "You kept this? All this time?" Michael asked, his voice rough with emotion. David quickly folded the paper and tucked it away. "Some promises you can't forget, even when you break them." Their food arrived, steam rising from David's soup. He picked up his spoon with trembling hands and began to eat slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. "My parents died." The words came suddenly, making Michael look up sharply. "Car crash. I was 19. David, I'm so sorry. I never knew. How could you? I disappeared. Had to." David stirred his soup listlessly. "There's more, but I can't." "Not yet." Michael watched as his friend took another careful spoonful of soup. The movement exposed the track marks on his arm again, telling part of the story David wouldn't share. "You can stay with me tonight," Michael offered. "I have a house nearby. Clean bed, hot shower. No." David's response was quick, almost panicked. "1 meal. That was the deal." "At least let me get you a hotel room. It's supposed to rain tonight." David was quiet for a long time, staring into his soup as if it held answers. Finally, he spoke so softly Michael had to lean forward to hear. One night. Just one. Then you go back to your life, and I go back to mine." Michael wanted to argue, to insist on doing more, but he recognized the stubborn set of David's jaw. It was the same expression he'd worn when teaching Michael that fake pass, trying it over and over until they got it perfect. "Okay," Michael agreed. One night. They finished their meal in silence. The chocolate shake sat between them, untouched, both straws dripping condensation onto the table. Some memories, Michael realized, were better left in the past. As they stood to leave, David swayed slightly. Michael reached out to steady him, but David flinched away from his touch. "I don't need help," he said sharply, then softened his tone. "I've made it this far on my own." Outside, the night had grown colder. Michael's driver had arrived with his car, but David insisted on walking to the hotel. They moved slowly through the darkened streets, past the basketball court where their dreams had once seemed so possible. "You were wrong earlier," David said suddenly, stopping under a streetlight. "About me being better than you back then." "No, I wasn't. Everyone knew you had more natural talent." David shook his head. "You had something I never did, Michael. Something more important than talent." He started walking again before Michael could ask what he meant. At the hotel, Michael got David a room and handed him the key card. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Michael felt the rough calluses that had replaced the familiar basketball calluses of their youth. "Thank you," David mumbled, already turning away, "for the food and this." "I'll come by in the morning," Michael said. "We can talk more." David didn't respond. He shuffled toward the elevator, shoulders hunched, carrying the weight of untold stories. As the doors closed behind him, Michael caught one last glimpse of his friend's face and saw something that made his heart sink. David's eyes held the look of someone planning to disappear again. Michael paced the hotel lobby for nearly an hour, unable to shake the feeling that David would vanish if he left. The front desk clerk kept sneaking glances at him, probably wondering why Michael Jordan was wearing a path in their carpet at midnight. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He approached the desk, putting on his most charming smile. "I need another key to room 412, he said. "My friend. He might need help during the night." The clerk hesitated, but it's hard to say no to a legend. Minutes later, Michael was riding the elevator to the 4th floor, the spare key card heavy in his pocket. The hallway was silent except for the soft hum of the ice machine. Michael paused outside David's door, listening. No sound came from inside. His heart racing, he knocked softly. "David, it's Michael." Nothing. He was about to use the key card when he heard movement inside. The door opened a crack, and David's eye peered out. "You're still here?" David's voice was rough. "I told you, I'm fine." "Can I come in? Just for a minute?" David sighed, but opened the door wider. The room's lights were off, but moonlight streaming through the window revealed that David hadn't touched the bed. He'd been sitting in the corner chair, his few possessions still wrapped tightly around him. Michael flipped on the light. David squinted and turned away, but not before Michael caught sight of his red-rimmed eyes. "You were planning to leave, weren't you? Old habits." David's laugh was bitter. "Doesn't feel right being in a place like this." Michael sat on the edge of the bed, noting how David kept his distance, staying near the door like he might bolt at any second. "When's the last time you slept in a real bed?" David shrugged. "What month is it?" The casual way he said it made Michael's chest ache. He watched as David's hands fidgeted with the zipper of his worn jacket, a nervous gesture that reminded him of their childhood. David used to do the same thing before big games. "Take a shower," Michael said softly. Get some rest. Nobody's going to hurt you here." David's eyes snapped up, suddenly sharp. "You think that's what I'm afraid of?" "I don't know what you're afraid of, Dee. You won't tell me." Silence stretched between them. David's gaze drifted to the bathroom door, then back to the exit, like he was weighing his options. "The shower does sound nice," he admitted finally. "I'll wait out here," Michael said. "Make sure no one bothers you." David hesitated, then grabbed one of the hotel's complimentary robes. 15 minutes. Then you should go home." The bathroom door closed, and soon the sound of running water filled the room. Michael sat quietly, listening to make sure David didn't try to climb out the bathroom window. Though they were 4 stories up, he wouldn't put it past his friend to try. His eyes fell on David's discarded jacket. A piece of paper had fallen from one of the pockets. Michael knew he shouldn't look, but concern for his friend outweighed his guilt. He picked it up carefully. It was a hospital discharge form dated 3 months ago. Most of it was medical jargon, but a few phrases jumped out. Substance abuse. Rehabilitation recommended. Patient left against medical advice. The water shut off. Michael quickly returned the paper to the jacket. David emerged wearing the white hotel robe, his wet hair plastered to his head. He looked younger somehow, more like the boy Michael remembered. But the track marks on his arms were now clearly visible, telling their own story of pain and desperation. "Feel better?" Michael asked. David nodded, running his fingers through his wet hair. "Almost feel human again." He caught sight of his reflection in the mirror and quickly looked away. "Almost. Get some sleep, Dee. We can talk more in the morning." "Why are you doing this?" David's question was barely a whisper. "Why can't you just let me go?" Michael stood, walking slowly toward his friend. "Because 30 years ago, you believed in me when nobody else did. You taught me that fake pass, remember? Spent hours practicing with me. Never gave up on me. That was different. We were kids." "No," Michael said firmly. "It's not different. You didn't give up on me then. I'm not giving up on you now." Tears welled in David's eyes. He blinked them away quickly, but his voice was shaky when he spoke. "Some things can't be fixed, Michael. Some mistakes. They follow you forever. Let me help you." "You can't." David's words were final. "Nobody can." Michael wanted to argue, but he recognized the wall coming down in David's eyes. Push too hard now, and his friend would run. "Get some rest," he said instead. "I'll bring breakfast in the morning." David gave a small nod, but didn't move toward the bed. As Michael reached the door, David spoke again. "Hey, MJ?" "Yeah?" "That fake pass. You made it better than I ever did. Added your own style to it. That's why you made it to the top. You always took what life gave you and made it better." The words felt heavy with meaning Michael couldn't quite grasp. Before he could respond, David turned away, effectively ending the conversation. In the hallway, Michael leaned against the wall, listening. He heard the soft click of the room's lock, followed by silence. Part of him wanted to stay all night, to make sure David didn't disappear again. But trust had to start somewhere. He walked to the elevator, his mind racing. The hospital form, the track marks, David's cryptic words, pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Whatever demons had driven his friend to this point, they weren't going to be exorcised in one night. As the elevator doors closed, Michael made a decision. First thing tomorrow, he would cancel all his meetings. David Thompson had once given up countless hours to help a young Michael Jordan chase his dreams. Now it was time to return the favor. But when morning came, Michael's greatest fear would prove true. The hotel room would be empty, the bed untouched, and David Thompson would once again vanish into the shadows of the city. The only trace left behind would be that worn piece of paper with their childhood pact, placed carefully on the pillow, a reminder of promises broken and dreams unfulfilled. Michael stared at the folded paper in his hands, their childhood promise now feeling like a weight in his chest. Sunlight streamed through the hotel room window, illuminating the untouched bed where David should have been sleeping. His phone buzzed again, his assistant reminding him about today's meetings. Without hesitation, he texted back, "Cancel everything. Family emergency." In a way, it wasn't a lie. David had been like family once. He tucked the pact carefully into his wallet and headed for the street. The morning air was crisp, and the city was just waking up. Where would a homeless man go at dawn? His first stop was Joey's Pizza, where he'd first spotted David. The morning crew was just arriving, and their eyes widened at the sight of Michael Jordan asking about a homeless man. "Oh, you mean Guardian Angel?" the young cook said, stacking boxes. "That's what we call him anyway. He stops other homeless folks from fighting over the leftovers, makes sure everyone gets a fair share." "When's the last time you saw him?" "Yesterday. Evening. But he doesn't come by every day." The cook hesitated. "Sometimes he disappears for weeks, especially when the weather gets bad." Michael's next stop was the local homeless shelter. The woman at the desk recognized David from his description immediately. "Mr. Thompson? He helps us sometimes, actually. Breaks up fights, talks to the younger ones who are just hitting the streets." She checked her logbook. "Haven't seen him. In about a month, though. He never stays here himself. Says the beds should go to those who need them more." "Do you know where I might find him?" She shook her head. "He keeps to himself, mostly. But you might try talking to old Pete at the coffee cart on Market Street. They seem friendly." The coffee cart was doing brisk morning business when Michael arrived. Old Pete turned out to be a weathered man with kind eyes and a ready smile. His face lit up at the mention of David. "The professor? That's what I call him, on account of how he's always helping the street kids with their homework." Michael blinked, in surprise. "Homework? Oh, yeah. He finds kids who are still trying to stay in school despite being homeless. Helps them with math and such. Did it right here at my cart yesterday morning." Pete pointed to a stack of cardboard boxes behind his cart. "Made a little classroom out of those boxes. Even bought them hot chocolate with what little money he had." The image hit Michael hard. David, despite his own desperate situation, spending his precious few dollars to help homeless kids stay in school. "Any idea where I can find him?" Pete scratched his chin. "Try the library, maybe. He takes the kids there sometimes when it rains. Or there's that spot under the bridge where—" "Which bridge?" "Marshall Street Bridge." "But mister," Pete called as Michael turned to go, "be careful how you approach. The professor's got a good heart, but he spooks easy. Seen too much bad stuff, I reckon." The walk to Marshall Street Bridge took 20 minutes. The area underneath was scattered with makeshift shelters, cardboard, tarps, and whatever materials people could find to keep the elements at bay. At first glance, it looked deserted, but then Michael spotted a familiar figure huddled in the shadows, surrounded by 3 young teenagers with backpacks and school books. David was pointing at something in a math textbook, explaining patiently as one of the kids nodded along. He looked exhausted, but his voice carried the same steady patience he'd used when teaching Michael that fake pass so many years ago. The scene made Michael's throat tight. Even at his lowest point, David was still teaching, still helping others chase their dreams. One of the kids spotted Michael and gasped. David's head snapped up, their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. "Go on to school," David told the kids quietly. "We'll finish this tomorrow." The teenagers gathered their books, shooting excited glances at Michael as they hurried past. One of them whispered, "Thanks, Professor," before disappearing up the embankment. David stood slowly, his body tense like he might run again. "You shouldn't be here, Michael. Neither should you." Michael took a step closer, holding up the childhood pact. "You left this behind, kept it long enough." David's voice was rough. "Time to let old dreams die." "Is that what you're doing under this bridge? Letting dreams die?" Michael gestured to where the kids had been sitting. "Looks to me like you're helping others build their dreams instead." David looked away, just trying to give them a fighting chance. Maybe they won't make the same mistakes I did. "Come with me, Dee. Whatever you're running from, whatever mistakes you made, we can face them together." "You don't understand." David's hands were shaking again. "You can't help me, Michael. Nobody can." "Then help those kids instead. I've got a youth center across town. We could use someone with your teaching skills, someone who understands what these kids are going through." For a moment, hope flickered in David's eyes. Then, darkness crashed back in. "I can't." His voice broke. "You don't know what I did. If you knew, then tell me." Michael took another step forward. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." David backed away, shaking his head. "I have to go. Please, just remember me like I was. The kid who taught you that fake pass. Not—" He gestured to himself. "Not this." "David, wait." But he was already moving, ducking deeper under the bridge where the shadows grew thick. Michael started to follow, then stopped. Chasing him hadn't worked before. He needed another way. Standing alone under the bridge, Michael looked at the makeshift classroom David had created. A milk crate for a desk, flattened cardboard for seats, worn textbooks carefully protected from the damp ground. Even in his darkest moments, David was still trying to light the way for others. Michael pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah, it's me. I need surveillance on the Marshall Street Bridge area. Full coverage, but discreet. I want to know every move he makes, every person he talks to. And get me everything you can find about David Thompson's life over the past 30 years. Everything." He looked at the childhood pact one more time before tucking it away. One way or another, he would save his friend, even if David didn't want to be saved. For 3 days, Michael watched. His security team reported David's every movement, how he divided his time between helping kids with homework, organizing the food line at Joey's Pizza, and sleeping in different spots each night to stay safe. But on the 4th morning, everything changed. "Sir," his security chief called at dawn. "He's collapsed under the bridge." Michael was there in 10 minutes, tires screeching as he parked. He found David curled up on his cardboard bed, shivering despite the warm morning. His skin burned with fever. "No hospital," David mumbled when Michael touched his forehead. "Please, can't afford it." "I've got you, Dee." Michael scooped up his friend, alarmed at how light he felt. "Just like you had me all those years ago." David was too weak to argue as Michael carried him to the car. His security team had already called ahead to the city's best private hospital. Within an hour, David was in a private room, doctors hovering around him. Michael paced the hallway, waiting. Finally, the doctor emerged. "He's severely malnourished and has pneumonia," she said. "But there's something else. During our examination, we found—" She hesitated. "Perhaps you should talk to him." Inside the room, David looked small against the white hospital sheets. An IV dripped fluids into his arm. His eyes opened when Michael entered. And for the first time since their reunion, he didn't try to run. "Guess I messed up your plans to save me," David said weakly. "You're still breathing, aren't you? Plan's working fine so far." Michael sat in the chair beside the bed. "Doctor says we need to talk." David closed his eyes. "They found the mass, didn't they?" Michael's heart stopped. "Mass? Cancer." David's laugh was hollow. "Found out 6 months ago at the free clinic. That's why..." He gestured vaguely at himself. "What's the point of trying to fix a broken life when it's ending anyway?" "We'll get you the best treatment." "No." David's voice was stronger now. "I don't want treatment. Don't deserve it. That's the fever talking. It's the truth talking." David turned to face Michael, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. "You want to know what happened to me? Why I disappeared? Fine. But after I tell you, you'll understand why I have to let this thing take me." Michael leaned forward, his heart pounding. Finally, after all these years, he would learn what destroyed his friend's dreams. "Remember when my parents died?" David's voice was distant, lost in memory. "Everyone thought it was an accident. Drunk driver, they said. Hit them head on." He paused, his hands clutching the hospital blanket. "But it wasn't just some random drunk driver, Michael. It was me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Michael felt his world tilt. "I was celebrating," David continued, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. "Made the starting lineup for the college team, went to a party, thought I was okay to drive. I wasn't." Tears rolled down David's hollowed cheeks. "I woke up in the hospital. They told me the other car. My parents." His voice broke. "They died instantly. Their only son killed them." "David." Michael reached for his friend's hand. But David pulled away. The team covered it up. Small town, big basketball program. They made it look like some unnamed drunk driver. Gave me a second chance. He laughed bitterly. "But how do you live with something like that? You were young. It was an Evifwe accident. An accident I caused." David's voice rose, then fell as a coughing fit took him. When he could speak again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I tried to keep playing. Thought maybe I could honor their memory somehow. But I couldn't sleep. Couldn't focus. Started taking pills to get through games." Michael remembered the track marks he'd seen. The story was falling into place now. 1 pill became 2. 2 became 10. Before I knew it. David shrugged. Basketball was gone. Everything was gone. Seemed fair. Really. I took my parents' lives. Why should I get to keep mine? So you chose this instead? Living on the streets? Chose to help others. Try to keep other kids from making my mistakes. David's eyes drifted to the window. Those kids under the bridge, they still have a chance. Maybe if I can help them. "And the cancer?" Michael asked softly. "Is that your way of punishing yourself too?" David was quiet for a long moment. "When they found it, I thought, finally, I can stop running. Stop trying to make up for something that can never be made right. Your parents wouldn't. Want this, Dee? Don't." David's voice was sharp. "Don't tell me what they'd want. They're not here to want anything. Because of me." A nurse came in to check David's vitals, giving Michael a moment to process everything. When they were alone again, he spoke carefully. "Remember what you told those kids yesterday? About second chances? That's different. They're innocent. So, were you? Young and stupid, maybe. but not evil. Michael pulled out the childhood pact, now worn thin from handling. The David Thompson who wrote this, who spent hours teaching me that fake pass, who believed in me when nobody else did. That person deserves a second chance too. David stared at the paper, his hands shaking. It's too late. No, it's not. The doctors here can help. We'll beat this cancer, get you clean, find you a real place to live. Michael leaned forward. Those kids need their professor, and I need my friend back. Tears flowed freely down David's face now. I don't know how to stop running, he whispered. Then let me help you remember how to stand still. Michael finally took his friend's hand, and this time, David didn't pull away. One step at a time, just like when we were learning basketball. Remember? David's fingers tightened around Michael's. I'm scared, MJ. I know, but you're not alone anymore. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the city. Somewhere under the bridge, David's makeshift classroom waited empty. But maybe, Michael thought, his friend had one more lesson to teach about forgiveness, redemption, and the courage to face your demons. David's eyes were growing heavy with exhaustion and medication, but before he drifted off, he spoke one last time. Hey, Michael? Yeah? Think you could teach me that fake pass again? Once I'm better? Michael smiled through his own tears. Anytime, D. Anytime. But as David fell asleep, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something his friend wasn't telling him, something even darker than the tragedy he'd just revealed. The real reason he'd been living under that bridge, the truth about that scar on his face, and the real story behind his cousin James's death. Michael spent the night in the hospital room, watching David sleep. His friend's face was troubled even in rest, like he was fighting battles in his dreams. The scar on his cheek seemed to stand out more in the dim light, a pale line that spoke of untold stories. Morning brought a team of doctors, their faces serious as they studied test results. Michael stepped into the hallway to give them privacy, but David's weak voice called him back. Stay. Please. The head doctor cleared her throat, looking between them. Mr. Thompson, we've completed our full analysis of your condition. David's hand found Michael's, gripping it tight. Just tell me how long. That's just it. The doctor's expression softened. The mass we detected, it's not cancerous. The words hung in the air like suspended time. Michael felt David's hand go slack in his. What? David's voice was barely a whisper. You have a benign tumor, completely treatable. The free clinic's limited equipment led to a misdiagnosis. With proper surgery and care, you should make a full recovery. David started shaking, small tremors that grew into full-body shudders. Michael wrapped an arm around his friend's shoulders as deep, racking sobs tore from his chest. I thought, David choked out, I thought this was my punishment. My way to pay for everything. The doctors quietly left the room, giving them privacy. Michael held his friend as years of guilt and pain poured out of him. I don't know how to live, David finally whispered. I was ready to die, had it all planned out. Then we'll teach you how to live again. Michael's voice was firm. Just like you taught me that fake pass, step by step. The surgery. David looked at his ragged hands. I can't afford. Don't. Michael cut him off. Don't even think about that. I've got you. A nurse brought breakfast, but David just pushed the food around his plate. His eyes kept darting to the window, to freedom, like a caged animal. Talk to me, Dee. What are you thinking? Thinking how easy it would be to walk out that door. Go back under the bridge. Let nature take its course anyway. Why? Michael pulled his chair closer. You've got a second chance here, a real one. David's laugh was bitter. Second chances are for people who deserve them. Like those kids you've been helping? The ones you spend your last dollars on too? Buy hot chocolate? That's different. I'm trying to save them from… David stopped abruptly. From what? From people like me. David's voice was so low Michael had to lean in to hear. The ones who destroy lives and walk away. Michael studied. His friend's face, the scar, the haunted eyes, the weight of secrets still untold. What really happened to your face, Dee? David's hand went to the scar automatically. Doesn't matter. It matters to you. I can see it in your eyes every time you look in a mirror. Silence stretched between them. Outside, a siren wailed in the IEOD distance. It happened the night your cousin died, David finally said. Michael's heart stopped. James? What are you talking about? James died in a car crash 15 years ago. Hit-and-run driver. Yeah. David's voice cracked. Hit and run. The implications of those words slammed into Michael like a physical blow. He stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. No, he whispered. No, it couldn't have been. I was using again. David's words came faster now, like a dam breaking. Bad batch. Didn't know where I was, what I was doing. Woke up with this. Cut on my face from the windshield and found out… His voice broke. Found out I'd killed your cousin. Your family. Michael stumbled back until he hit the wall. Memories flooded in. James's funeral. His aunt's tears. The mysterious donation that paid for everything. That was you? The anonymous donor? David nodded. Sold everything I had. Not that it could ever make up for… I wanted to turn myself in. Was going to, but… But what? But I saw you at the funeral. Heard you talking about James, how he'd been helping kids in the neighborhood stay off drugs. And I thought, maybe I could do that too. Not enough to make up for taking him, but… David's voice faded to nothing. Michael's legs gave out, and he slid down the wall to sit on the floor. His mind was spinning, trying to reconcile his childhood friend with the man who killed his cousin. All these years, he whispered, living on the streets, helping those kids. You were trying to continue James's work? Trying to give his death some meaning. David wouldn't meet his eyes. The kids under the bridge, they remind me of me before everything went wrong. If I can keep just one of them from making my mistakes. Why didn't you tell me when I found you? How could I? David's laugh was hollow. Hi, Michael. Remember me? Your old friend who taught you basketball and then killed your cousin? He shook his head. Better you thought I was just another junkie who lost his way. Michael stayed on the floor, his head in his hands. Through the window, he could see the bridge where David had made his homeless classroom, where he'd been trying to atone for his sins, one tutoring session at a time. The surgery, David said quietly. I won't take your money. Not after what I did to your family. Michael looked up at his friend. This broken man, who had carried such a heavy burden for so long, who had punished himself far more than any court ever could. James, Michael said slowly, believed in redemption. That's why he worked with those kids. He believed anyone could change if they were given the chance. I don't deserve… This isn't about what you deserve. Michael stood up, his decision made. It's about what those kids under the bridge deserve. They need their professor. David's hands were shaking again. How can you even look at me? Because I see two people when I look at you. The man who killed my cousin, and the man who spent 15 years trying to make it right. Michael moved to the bed and took David's trembling hands in his. James would have forgiven you. Maybe it's time you forgave yourself. Tears streamed down David's face. I don't know how. Then let me help you learn. Step by step. Michael squeezed his hands. But first, you have to choose to live. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Finally, David spoke, his voice barely audible. Okay. Okay what? Okay, I'll try. David looked up, meeting Michael's eyes for the first time since his confession. For James, for those kids, I'll try to live. Michael nodded, his own eyes wet. Then we'll do this together, just like old times. But as a nurse came in to prep David for pre-surgery tests, Michael's mind was already racing ahead, because he knew that somewhere in this hospital, in David's admission paperwork, was a confession to a 15-year-old hit and run. And Michael Jordan had 24 hours to decide whether to turn that paperwork over to the police or help his childhood friend continue his mission of redemption. The choice would change both their lives forever. Michael sat in his car outside, the police station, the hospital admission papers heavy in his hands. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He hadn't slept all night. The papers contained everything. David's confession, the details of James's death, the years of hidden guilt. One trip inside the station, and justice would finally be served. But what kind of justice? His phone buzzed, a text from the hospital. David's surgery was scheduled for noon. The doctors were optimistic about removing the benign tumor. His friend would live, unless Michael walked through those police station doors. He closed his eyes, remembering James. His cousin had been the kind one, the one who believed in second chances, who spent his weekends working with troubled kids, convincing them it wasn't too late to change. "What would you do, James?" Michael whispered to the empty car. As if in answer, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo from one of his security team members. They were still watching the bridge, as ordered. The image showed 3 teenagers huddled there, looking lost. "The professor's kids," the text read. "They've been waiting since dawn. Don't know he's in the hospital." Michael started his car. Sometimes, he realized, justice wears different faces. 20 minutes later, he pulled up under the bridge. The teenagers looked up, hope turning to disappointment when they saw it wasn't David. "The professor's sick," Michael said gently. "He's in the hospital." "Is he gonna die?" The youngest boy clutched his math book. "He promised to help me pass my test on Friday." "No, he's not dying." Michael smiled. "But he might need some help when he gets out. Think you guys could look after him for a change?" They nodded eagerly. The oldest girl spoke up, her voice quiet. "He saved my life, you know. Found me trying to buy drugs right here. Talked me out of it. Told me his story." "His whole story?" Michael asked sharply. "About his parents, about the drugs, about..." She hesitated. "About your cousin." Michael's heart stopped. "He told you that?" She nodded. "Said we needed to know where rock bottom really was. That's why he lives out here, to remind himself and to stop others from following his path." The papers in Michael's pocket seemed to burn. This was what James would have wanted. Not punishment, but redemption. Not justice, but transformation. Back at the hospital, he found David being prepped for surgery. His friend looked up with resigned eyes. "You went to the police," David said. It wasn't a question. Michael pulled out the admission papers. "No, but I did go to the bridge." Hope flickered in David's eyes, then died. "The kids, are they okay?" "They're worried about their professor." Michael sat beside the bed. "The girl, the oldest one. She told me what you did for her, what you've done for all of them. Doesn't make up for what I did to James." "No, it doesn't." Michael's voice was firm. "Nothing can bring him back. But this," he held up the papers, "this isn't what he would have wanted." With deliberate movements, Michael tore the papers into tiny pieces. "What are you doing?" David whispered. "Choosing what kind of justice I believe in." Michael met his friend's eyes. James believed in redemption. "So do I." Tears rolled down David's cheeks. "I don't deserve—" "Stop saying that." Michael's voice cracked. "You've punished yourself enough. 15 years on the streets, helping those kids, carrying this guilt. Maybe it's time to honor James's memory by truly living again." "How?" Michael smiled. "I've been thinking about that. My youth center needs someone who understands these kids, someone who's walked in their shoes and found a way back. You'd trust me? After everything?" "I trust the man who spends his last dollars buying hot chocolate for homeless kids, the man who sleeps under a bridge so he can be there when troubled teenagers need him." Michael squeezed his friend's hand. "The man my cousin would have been proud to work alongside." David's body shook with silent sobs. When he could speak again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I see his face every night in my dreams. Always will." "Good." Michael's voice was gentle but firm. "Let it remind you to keep doing his work, to keep saving lives, one kid at a time." The nurses came to take David to surgery. As they wheeled him out, he grabbed Michael's hand one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a chance to make things right." "You already were," Michael replied. "I just helped you see it." Hours later, as David recovered from successful surgery, Michael made some calls. Within days, the youth center would have a new apartment ready. Simple, but clean and safe. Aid, place where troubled kids could always find their professor. A month later, David stood in front of his first official class at the center. The teenagers from the bridge sat in the front row, beaming with pride. On the wall hung 2 photos, one of James, smiling at the camera, and one of 2 young boys on a basketball court, practicing a fake pass. Michael watched from the doorway as his friend began to teach, sharing not just mathematics, but hard-earned wisdom about choices, consequences, and the long road to redemption. Sometimes, Michael realized, the greatest acts of justice aren't found in courtrooms or prison cells, but in the quiet moments of transformation, in second chances, in the power of forgiveness to change not just one life, but countless others. And somewhere, he was sure, James was smiling. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey of friendship, redemption, and second chances. Stories like these remind us that it's never too late to make things right. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop a comment below sharing your country and what touched you most about David and Michael's story. Did you see the ending coming? What would you have done in Michael's position? If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Every like helps more people discover stories that matter. Until our next story, remember, sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from those who seem to have the least to give. Stay blessed and keep believing in the power of forgiveness.